Keir Starmer was confidently defending his stance, and the next, Katie Hopkins dropped a line so sharp it cut straight through the conversation. Cameras caught his jaw tighten, his eyes narrow, and his voice rise just a notch. This wasn't the calm, measured politician people were used to seeing. This was different. This was raw, and it was happening live, with millions watching. It was supposed to be just another high-profile political interview. The kind of segment where the host asks predictable questions, the politician delivers polished answers, and viewers forget about it within a day or two. But that's not what happened this time. Instead, the interview turned into one of the most talked about moments in recent British political media, all because of one clash between Keir Starmer and Katie Hopkins. The segment aired on a primetime talk programme known for its unfiltered style and heated debates. The producers had invited Starmer to discuss pressing national issues. From the economy and public services to law and order, it was a chance for him to reinforce his image as a steady, in-control leader. What he didn't know was that sitting opposite him would be one of the most relentless media personalities in Britain, ready to go off script at any moment. Katie Hopkins had built a career on being outspoken, often walking the fine line between bold commentary and outright provocation. Love her or hate her, one thing was certain: she knew how to get a reaction. And on this night, that's exactly what she was aiming for. She didn't wait long. From the very first moments, her tone was sharp, her gaze fixed, and her questions loaded. Starmer started the interview calmly, speaking in measured sentences and leaning into the points he wanted to make. He talked about policy reform, fairness in governance, and the need for unity. His voice was steady, his expression confident, but Katie wasn't there to nod along. She pushed, interrupted, and reframed his answers in ways that forced him to defend himself instead of simply delivering talking points. The tension in the studio built slowly. The host, sensing the shift, allowed the back and forth to flow without stepping in too soon. The audience, both in the studio and at home, could feel that something was brewing. Starmer's calm was still holding, but there was an edge creeping into his tone. Katie, sensing the change, leaned in even more. Her strategy was clear: keep pressing until the facade cracked. By the 5-minute mark, the interview had already strayed from its planned structure. Instead of neatly moving from topic to topic, it was now a tug-of-war over control of the conversation. Starmer's body language shifted. He sat more upright, his hands clasped tighter, his replies more clipped. Katie's questions grew more pointed, each one probing deeper into areas she knew were politically sensitive for him. And then, without warning, came the first spark. Katie framed a question in a way that suggested Starmer had been deliberately avoiding the truth on a key issue. It was more than a challenge. It was an accusation. The studio's energy changed instantly. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from those watching in real time. This was no longer about political debate. This was personal. That's when the tone of the night was set. There was no going back to safe, scripted talking points. From here on, it would be a test of who could hold their ground longer. The politician with everything to lose, or the media firebrand who thrived on pushing people past their breaking point. Keir Starmer is not the kind of politician who usually loses his cool. Since stepping into the spotlight as the leader of the Labour Party, he has carefully crafted a public image built on calm authority, steady leadership, and measured responses. A former barrister and head of the Crown Prosecution Service, Starmer's reputation has been shaped by his precision with words and his ability to keep emotions in check. For many of his supporters, this is his strength. He doesn't get dragged into the noise, he stays above it. But there's another side to that image. Critics often accuse him of being overly cautious, dodging direct answers, and wrapping every statement in layers of careful language. To them, he is a politician who plays it too safe, avoiding confrontation whenever possible. That's why this live exchange was so unusual. People weren't used to seeing him rattled, and that made every second of the encounter more gripping. On the other side of the table sat Katie Hopkins, a figure who is the complete opposite in style and approach. Known for her outspoken, often controversial opinions, Hopkins has built her career on saying what others wouldn't dare. She doesn't hide behind polite phrases or diplomatic language. She charges straight into topics others tiptoe around, and she's willing to take the backlash that comes with it. To her fans, she's a truth teller who exposes hypocrisy. To her critics, she's a provocateur who thrives on outrage. The clash between these two was inevitable. Starmer's political brand relies on control. Control of the narrative, control of the tone, control of the message. Hopkins' brand thrives on disruption, breaking through rehearsed statements, forcing a reaction, and leaving her opponent visibly unsettled. When these two worlds collided on live television, It was only a matter of time before the sparks turned into flames. Katie came into the studio prepared. She knew Starmer's weak spots, the policies he's been accused of flip-flopping on, the speeches where his words have been called out as vague, and the moments his leadership has been questioned even within his own party. She didn't just want to interview him, she wanted to corner him. Every question she asked was built to chip away at his composure, to make him react instead of respond. Starmer, for his part, also knew who he was facing. He's seen the clips of Hopkins dominating conversations, cutting through polite debate with blunt, sometimes brutal remarks. He knew this wouldn't be a gentle Q&A session. That's why, in the opening minutes, he kept his posture firm, his voice calm, and his words deliberate. The strategy of someone who understood that one wrong move could become a viral moment for all the wrong reasons. But live television is unpredictable. There are no retakes, no edits. Every glance, every pause, every shift in tone is captured and broadcast in real time. And when two personalities like this meet under those conditions, the margin for staying in control becomes dangerously thin. What made this moment so fascinating wasn't just the political substance. It was the clash of two communication styles at the extreme ends of the spectrum. One, a politician trained to avoid confrontation unless absolutely necessary. The other, a media figure whose entire career is built on creating it. This wasn't just an interview, it was a battle over the tempo, tone, and truth of the conversation. And as the minutes ticked by, you could see that battle playing out not just in the words spoken, but in the body language, the pacing, and the unspoken tension hanging in the air. Starmer was holding on, but Hopkins was closing in. From the very first question, the mood in the studio was different. This wasn't the polite back and forth you might expect in a political interview. Katie Hopkins came in with an edge. A tone that said she wasn't here to exchange pleasantries. Her first few questions were sharp, but not yet explosive, like a boxer testing their opponent's guard before going in for the big hit. Keir Starmer answered them with his usual steady delivery. He didn't rush, he kept his voice low, his sentences measured. At first glance, it seemed like he was in control, brushing off the jabs and sticking to his talking points. But if you watched closely, you could see the early signs of strain. His hand movements became tighter, his eyes flicked away from Katie more often, and each time she cut in to challenge him, his pauses grew just a little longer before he replied. Katie's strategy was working. She didn't let him fully finish a point before swooping in with another question, often reframing his own words in ways that made them sound evasive or contradictory. It was a clever tactic, force him to respond to her version of his answers instead of the message he came to deliver. The studio audience could feel the shift too. There were no big outbursts yet, but the air felt heavier. You could hear small murmurs and quiet laughter from those watching in the room whenever Katie landed a particularly cutting remark. The host, sensing the momentum, didn't step in to slow things down. He let it run, knowing that moments like these make television unforgettable. At one point, Starmer tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, talking about economic policy and investment in public services. But Katie was ready. She pounced with a direct question about a recent policy reversal, something critics had called a U-turn. She didn't just ask why he changed his position. She implied that he had done so to please certain political allies, abandoning his promises to voters. For the first time, Starmer's voice shifted. It wasn't a full raise, but there was a new tension in it, a clipped tone that gave away his irritation. He leaned forward slightly, as if to close the distance between them, and his words came faster. It was the first visible crack in his calm. Katie noticed. She leaned back in her chair with the faintest smile, the kind of look that says, "Got you." She didn't press immediately. Instead, she let him speak, let him get deeper into defending himself, and then, right as he seemed ready to wrap up his answer, she hit him with a follow-up that cut even closer to the bone. This time, it wasn't about policy details, it was about trust. She questioned whether he could truly be believed when he spoke about his plans for the country. She pointed to past interviews, to moments where he had dodged certain issues, and to statements that seemed to contradict each other. And she did it all in a tone that wasn't shouting. It was worse. It was calm, pointed, and laced with just enough sarcasm to make it sting. Starmer tried to laugh it off, but it didn't land. The smile was brief, and his eyes gave away his frustration. He began to talk over her, and for a few seconds both voices overlapped. Katie's quick and relentless. Starmer is louder now, trying to regain control. The tension was now impossible to ignore. Viewers at home could feel it through the screen. This wasn't just a discussion anymore. It was a test of who would break first. And as the seconds ticked by, it was clear the storm was coming. Katie had him exactly where she wanted him. The moment came quickly. so quickly that even those in the studio seemed caught off guard. Keir Starmer had been speaking over Katie Hopkins, trying to wrestle the conversation back into his hands. His words came faster now, his tone more forceful. He was no longer the calm, composed leader delivering carefully polished statements. He was a man defending himself, and every sentence sounded like it was pushing against an invisible wall. Katie let him run for a few seconds, her eyes fixed on him like she was watching a chess opponent making the exact moves she had predicted. Then, right when he paused to catch his breath, she delivered the line that lit the fire. "Keir," she said, her voice level but laced with challenge. "People aren't angry because they don't understand your policies. They're angry because they do understand them, and they've seen you break your word before." The room froze. Even the host shifted in his seat, clearly aware that this wasn't just a probing question anymore. It was a direct hit. For a brief moment, Starmer didn't reply. His eyes narrowed, his lips tightened. When he finally spoke, the words came out sharper than anything he'd said all evening. He accused Katie of twisting his record, of cherry-picking moments out of context, and of deliberately misleading the audience for the sake of spectacle. His voice had risen now, not to a shout, but enough that the calm, deliberate tone he's known for was gone. Katie didn't flinch. In fact, she leaned forward, her elbows on the table, and spoke over him. "This isn't about spectacle, Keir. It's about trust, and if you can't handle that question, maybe you can't handle leading the country." That was it, the breaking point. Starmer's hand hit the table, not in a slam, but a sharp tap that carried more weight than any outburst could. His words spilled out quickly, passionately, and without the filter of a pre-prepared talking point. He called her comments cheap and beneath the level of serious debate, but by then it didn't matter. The control was gone. The host finally tried to intervene, raising his voice slightly to break up the exchange, but the damage was done. The audience in the studio was murmuring, some leaning forward in their seats. Viewers at home were already reaching for their phones, knowing this was the kind of moment that would be clipped, shared, and replayed across social media before the show even ended. And that's exactly what happened. Within minutes, hashtags started trending. Short clips of Starmer's sharpest lines and Katie's equally biting retorts began circulating online. Some hailed Starmer for standing his ground, others said it was proof that Hopkins had rattled him beyond recovery. But no matter which side you were on, there was no denying it. This was the moment everyone would remember. The calm politician had cracked, and the relentless provocateur had gotten exactly what she came for.